for the month of November is financial health and prosperity, appropriate for the month of Thanksgiving when we're looking at the good, not only the monetary good, but all the good we have in our life, as Kathy sang. Give a little of your time, your praise, and so on. Last week, Dr. Arlene Austin did a talk she called Your Worthiness to Receive. And if you weren't here, I highly recommend you buy the CD and listen to it. And even if you were here, I enjoyed listening to it again because it was so packed with truth and things that we can do. And let's face it, we know in Science of Mind, everything begins in consciousness. So if we don't feel we're worthy to receive, if we don't embody that worthiness, guess what? We're not going to receive. And taking it one step further, if we don't understand and know deep within us and embody the fact that this is an abundant universe, that God is infinitely good, as Jesus said, it is God's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. If we don't understand that, if we're living instead from a fear-based kind of scarcity mentality, that's what we're going to experience. So it was a wonderful basis for this month when we're going to talk about abundance. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, wrote in our Science of Mind textbook this. He said, false mental causes are removed by a freshness of thought, sustained by an affirmative outlook of faith and trust in the perfection of life. We've learned that there is only one substance out of which everything is made. Cabbages and kings, hands and houses, men and women, and money. So money comes from that unformed substance, just as everything we see, everything we experience. There is only one source. It is not bad, it is not evil, and it is not something that's hard to come by, because we know that our thoughts are creative. So how good to begin this month with remembering this. Ernest Holmes also wrote in a book, The Power for Good, money being a neutral thing, has no preferences. It doesn't like one person more than another. It will flow toward the one who attracts it by holding a single mind toward it, who welcomes it, expects it, and knows that he is its master. We're all masters of our life. We're masters of our thoughts and therefore masters of our life, because we live in a universe that is for us, never against us. Walter did a nice introduction to our book of the month, The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist. I gotta tell you, this book is working me this month. It's working me. So, it's so good to revisit our principles of abundance, because that is one of our core principles in Science of Mind. But how good, too, to take it a step further, which Lynn does. She really talks about being conscious of how we receive money, how we hold on to money, and how we give money. So there's really, it's working me, and I invite you to buy the book and have it work you as well. Lynn talks, and we did talk about this last year, November 2, the difference between a scarcity mentality. But she says instead of a mentality of abundance, she calls it a mentality of sufficiency. Because yes, it's an infinite universe, absolutely. But you know what? We don't need infinite amounts of everything, right? And sometimes we can become, I think especially in this culture, unfortunately, we become so consumerized and so intent on bulk, and there's a fear sometimes that happens. She writes in the book about indigenous cultures where they're more tuned into sharing resources, having common resources, allocating resources, rather than hanging on to them. And knowing that we're all one. I think sometimes in our rich society, we can forget that. Yeah. So, sufficiency. Lynn Twist talks about 3 truths about sufficiency. And I'm going to talk about them for the next 3 weeks. Today's is called, and it may sound a little odd to you, money is like water. Money is like water. You may have some thoughts going on right now. What does that mean? But let me start with a wonderful story she tells, a true story. Lynn Twist worked for, and probably still does, the World Hunger Project. And way back in the beginning of her work, she had a request to go to Harlem to present a fundraising event. And right before she left for New York, she got another request to speak with the CEO of a very large, well-known food company and do a presentation for him. It turns out his company had some bad PR going on. They had done some nasty things, and they were getting killed in the press, and the company kind of felt the best thing to do would be to give a donation to the World Hunger Project because it would look good. So she managed to fly to Chicago in the morning, knowing that she would have to go to New York in the afternoon to do the evening presentation. Getting dressed, she said, for the meeting with the CEO, she kind of had, what do I wear? And she went through her wardrobe and finally settled on a silk dress. Off to Chicago she goes in front of the skyscraper. The suite for the CEO, needless to say, is in the penthouse at the top, and she has to take she has to use banks of different elevators to get there, and go through inner sanctums and outer rooms, and finally, arrives at his plush office in an atmosphere that she says felt very rarefied and a little stifling. So she walks into his beautiful office. He has a picture window he's sitting in front of with a beautiful view of New York. She has trouble seeing him because he's a little bit backlit. She does her presentation. She's been given 15 minutes to talk about her organization and what they do. And at the end of 15 minutes, in a perfunctory way, he just kind of reaches into a desk drawer, pulls out a pre-printed check for $50,000 and hands it to her. And she said, when I took that check in my hand, I kind of felt like I was receiving his guilt and shame over what he had done in the company. And I felt dirty. I didn't feel good. But I was new to this job and I didn't feel like I could give it back to him. So she stuck it in her briefcase, rushed downstairs, hailed a cab, on to New York. Her experience in Harlem was completely different. She met in a church. It was raining hard and the ceiling down there was very leaky, so they had a lot of buckets and were catching the rain and it was noisy. And she did her presentation, talking about what the World Hunger Project does. And at the end of her presentation, it was very quiet for a moment. And then a black woman, they were all black people at the presentation, and Lynn is white. This woman stood up about in her 60s or 70s, late 60s, early 70s, very tall and erect, and she had her hair back in a bun, and she said, "Girl, my name is Gertrude, and I like what you said, and I like you. Now, I ain't got no checkbook, and I ain't got no credit cards. To me, money is a lot like water. For some folks, it rushes through life like a raging river. Money comes through my life rather like a trickle. But I want to pass it on in a way that does the most good for the most people." I love that line. I want to pass it on in a way that does the most good for the most people. I see that as my right and my responsibility. It's also my joy. I have $50 in my purse that I earned from doing a white woman's wash, and I want to give it to you. She proceeded to give Lynn ones, fives, tens, amounted to $50. And one by one, everyone else in the crowd came up and put ones and fives and tens in her hand until she couldn't hold them anymore. She opened the briefcase where the check lay, and they put their money in there. And she said, "I started to cry because it felt like a sacred ceremony. These people giving because they agreed with the cause, and they were giving from their heart, from their soul." And she said, "I thought the money I collected that night from them would do a whole lot more toward ending world hunger because of the intention, the soul, the heart with which it was given." Beautiful story. There's an ending about the CEO, which I'm going to tell you a little later. I'm going to save it. Go to the end of it. So, money carries the soul's energy. Lynn Twist says, no matter how much or little money you have flowing through your life, when you direct that flow with soulful purpose, you feel wealthy. When you let your money move to things you care about, your life lights up. That's really what money is for. Made me think, Yeah. Now there's another story she tells in here. And it's a story about our power as consumers. Lynn had a granddaughter born. Her name was Aya. And at 3 months old, she had kind of run out of the clothes that they were given in their birth, in their showers and layettes. And her daughter-in-law wanted to go shopping for baby clothes. Now, Lynn, as much as she had worked in countries across the globe and was well aware of things like manufacturing that wasn't good for the earth, that wasn't sustainable, and child labor and unfair practices, as much as she was aware of all that, she was also a grandmother in this culture, hello, I know about that, influenced by the media. And so she had visions of, pink booties and sweaters and this and that, and matching outfits and more than enough. And her son called her the day before they went shopping and said, Mom, just keep in mind, we want to be mindful of where we buy and what we buy. So she was Off Limits, was one of the big trendy department stores because they did child labor practice. Off Limits was another popular store that didn't, they used harmful dyes in their clothing. And we don't need too much, we don't want to start a practice of excess. And at first Lynn was kind of deflated because her whole idea of the day was, but what happened was she, her daughter, and her daughter-in-law went shopping and spent time talking with the clerks in stores about where the products came from, the craftsmen that made it, how the products were made. And they bought just the right amount of beautiful stuff for this child, and they felt good about it. Now, I don't know about you, but I noticed that some of our younger folks are thinking this way these days, and telling me things like, I try to really, really go to mom and pop stores and stuff. I have a tendency to buy what's cheapest, best bargain. And it kind of made me think about it. Where we place our money is just as important as how we get it. And it's kind of interesting. This whole year in Science of Mind, centers across the globe, we've been talking about values-based spiritual living. That's been our yearly theme. So what better place to apply it than how we use our money? Is it based on our values? Is it consistent with our values? And I love the song, the giving song. There has to be a balance between, I happen to know Kathy's consciousness about money, and it's high. It's very high. We need to save sometimes. We in this center are talking about what is a prudent reserve. What's a prudent reserve for us to have in our savings account? Just in case. We don't know. But at the same time, if we hang on, I can't remember how the song went, but if we're greedy and we just hang on to things, nothing stagnant is very pretty or very useful. Think about water that becomes stagnant. Smelly, yucky, poo-poo, right? I think I said that. Blood, when it becomes stagnant, is dangerous, So we need to be circulating our good. In religious circles, we often talk about stewardship, which is really how we manage our prosperity and the wealth that we've been given. Now, there's another danger sometimes in spiritual circles because we know that our consciousness creates. Let's say someone receives a credit card in the mail. Maybe this happened to somebody or happened to you, with a line of credit. And they've been praying for a brand new car, and they go, oh, wow. Look, God gave me a way to get the brand new car. And we can justify and kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Rationalize spending money we don't have. When really, God hasn't given us a new car. God has given us debt that we owe to the bank. So, again, it's that balancing act, isn't it, of prudent reserves and yet putting things into circulation. Stewardship is the orderly, balanced use of what we currently have in terms of our spending. It's taking care of what we've already received. So I'm going to invite us this week to look at some questions in our own life. Do you know the flow of money in your own life? Are you mindful of how it comes to you? In other words, are we getting money from relationships or work that is depleting and enervating and not filling our soul? Or are we getting it from work or from people that we feel good about, the values that match ours? So where does our money come from is the first question. The second question is, where is our money going? Because that says a lot about what we value, doesn't it? The best way to do that, look at your checkbook register, look at your credit card statements if you use credit cards. Where is it going? How much to clothes? You know? How much to food? How much to our spiritual teachers, as Kathy mentioned? How much to helping others? Just take a good look at that, because it really tells us something. And where is enough enough? Where do we really, because there's nothing wrong with having material good. It makes us happy. It's part of what we're here to have and enjoy. But when is enough enough? And when is it time to share, to allocate, to distribute what we've been given? So just becoming conscious of the flow and the values they represent, to re-examine it and to adjust it if we want to. And again, I want to say, let's do this without blame and shame, right? Allah, are you worthy to receive? Let's not beat ourselves over the head if we're looking and thinking, you know what, I want to adjust something. Let's do it with self-love and care. Yeah. So going back to, well, let me read you a quote. Let me see, page number 119. Oh, I did that already. Okay. I'm going to wrap up here in a minute because we're going to hear from Caitlin. So here is a quote again from Lynn Twist. We all stand in the flow of money and have the opportunity to direct it. Each of us can discover in that flow our own sufficiency, our own prosperity, our own sense of enough, our own wealth. And she talks about philanthropy being the return to the soul of money, which can be the carrier of intentions, our energy, our love, our commitment to nourish those things that we most care about. 5 or 6 years after Lynn's experience with that CEO, she got a letter in the mail. He had retired and was given, as you can imagine, a very handsome settlement. He was wealthy beyond his dreams. And he wrote to Lynn that had she just not written him back after he tried to give her that money, he wouldn't even have remembered her. But he was struck by her letter and her suggestion that he find something he could feel committed to give to. And he said, you know, I've been given more than I could possibly need myself. And when I examined my own principles, my own values, I realized I do care. I do care about helping to end world hunger. And I have the means to do that. And so he included a check from his personal account, which she doesn't disclose the amount. She said it was well above the $50,000 he had sent before. And she said, I felt so good about that, and so good that he had been moved by our interaction. Lynn Twist says the experience of true wealth comes from sharing, expressing that you have and you are enough. Just food for thought this week. Because we know when we send money to poor countries, for example, a little bit of money goes a long way. Not to mention what is happening in our own country, which Caitlin is about to talk about. So I'm thinking, instead of praying right now, I'm going to invite Caitlin up in just a second. I want to get your last name right. McQuan. Caitlin spoke to our board about 6 weeks ago about the organization that she is the assistant to the head honcho, if you will, right?
Well, I'm the administrative assistant for the whole organization.
Okay, administrative assistant for the whole organization. I was kind of loath to use that word because I have an image of what administrative assistant does, and you are larger than that. Maybe all administrative assistants are. I would say that's probably true. So Caitlin works for an organization called Northwest Seasonal Workers Association. And the board has decided we would like to partner with this organization. Their goal, I believe, is to end poverty. So Caitlin, let's see, we need a mic for you. It's my pleasure to give you the mic and let you talk to us for about 5 minutes.
Thank you, everyone. Can you